Good morning and welcome. We're really delighted to have you join us for today's global conversation. The theme for today's conversation is ensuring health for all. And we will have an opportunity to hear from a colleague who has been very active with international work, even during the pandemic. We'd like to take a moment to thank our co-sponsors for today's program. UW's Institute for Regional and International Studies, National Resource Center, and the Center for Southeast Asian Studies, and to our speaker for sharing his work with us. Your host and moderator today is Dr. Tom Guerin. With 2 decades of experience in the research and development of food ingredients with the Carey Group, Tom has worked with manufacturers on different applications in countries and markets across the globe. As the research program manager at Center for Dairy Research, Tom works with staff to build on current CDR successes and helping the organization become more aligned with the changing demands and trends of the food industry. He is a native of Ireland and has a PhD in biochemistry from the National University of Ireland, Galway. For the past 14 years, Tom has been happy to call Wisconsin home, where he put down roots and started a family. He is excited to be part of the CDR team and looks forward to helping the organization move forward in its next stage of development. As we go along, please feel free to put questions or comments in the chat at any time, including if there's a broader question or specifically related to the presentation. We'll engage the questions following the presentation. Please note the session is being recorded. And without further ado, your host, Dr. Tom Guerin.
Hey, thanks, Jennifer. Much appreciated. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest installment of the Global Conversations. As Jennifer has said, this is it's a monthly series of presentations that brings the work of, the CALS global staff, brings it out front and shares with you, their work in international research and development and the effects that can have from a global perspective. I think for me, the series speaks not just in terms of how small the world has become, but really about how the efforts of all the presentations that you've heard today and other work throughout the center really is turning us into more of a global community where we kind of help each other. And I like that theme of how all this is being pulled together. You've had the chance so far to, and if you haven't, you can go back and look at the YouTube videos, but to take a look at all the other presentations, and you'll see how they all fit into that sense of a global community. Today is no exception, and with the theme of ensuring health for all, Adam Borger from the Food Research Institute is going to talk to us about a topic that's close to my heart as well, here in the Food Center, Center for Dairy Research, when we talk about food safety and how the efforts of the Food Research Institute can have a far-reaching effect. As Jennifer said, we ask that you submit your questions maybe into the chat section, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll have a question and answer session. And with that, just a brief background about Adam. Adam is the outreach coordinator for the UW-Madison Food Research Institute, which has a fairly long and an interesting history, which Adam will go through. And in this role, Adam conducts research projects between food companies and researchers on campus. Additionally, he routinely educates food industry professionals, general public, students on campus, etc. And prior to joining the University of Wisconsin, Adam was a member of the Kraft Foods Department in microbiology and food safety for over a decade, from 1998 to 2009. And then from 2009 to 2013, he was the senior microbiologist for Rich Products Corporation in Buffalo, New York. Adam earned a Bachelor of Science in Food Science from the Ohio State University and a Master of Science in Food Science, specializing in food microbiology and toxicology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So I'm excited to hear what the work that's going on at the Food Research Institute and some of the far-reaching effects that it has. And with that, Adam, I will turn it over to you, and I'll go quiet for a while.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Let me share my screen here. Hopefully everybody can see that and that it's full screen, and hopefully I can advance it. So thanks, Julia, Tom, and Jennifer for inviting me to to speak today. This will not be an hour long. And I think that's probably welcome for most folks that are on right now. So what we're going to do with this webinar today is I'll provide folks with a brief history of the Food Research Institute, because I'm guessing many people online and listening to this recording probably don't know who we are. So I'll talk a little bit about the brief history of FRI, that's our acronym. Talk about our current efforts, and then the reason I'm talking today is because this was about CALS Global Conversations. So we'll also mention how we've impacted food safety and in one instance, just general processing across the globe. If you are younger than, say, 50, maybe 40, you probably don't understand the reference picture here. That is the bat signal from the old Adam West and Batman series. We used to make a joke at FRI that folks needed help with food safety issues. You could turn on the FRI signal and we would come running to assist you if we can. And I think that still holds true today. So talking a little bit about the origins of the Food Research Institute and how it relates to today's talk. The key here is that back in 1946, the Food Research Institute was established at the University of Chicago. It's the first university/industry collaboration that focuses on food safety. Now, there are more today than there were back then, and there are a lot of university and industry collaborations at UW, at Ohio State, probably you name the university, they have industry collaborations. But from a food safety standpoint, this was one of the first ones back in the 40s. And the gentleman who founded it was named Gail Dack. And he established this agency, FRI, to investigate problems of food processing, food spoilage, food poisoning, and food quality. Again, working with industry, and they were the world's foremost authority on food poisoning at the time. An interesting side note, so Gail's the gentleman on the upper right, as I look at my screen. Back then, Dack and his colleagues, when they began investigating foodborne illnesses, and especially intoxications, like Staphylococcus aureus intoxication, the way they would do some of these experiments was actually to grow the cultures in broth and then drink them, and then see how they were feeling. Thankfully, research has progressed since those times, but I cannot imagine staring at a test tube thinking, I'm going to drink this and I'll either feel really good or I'm going to be really, really sick in a matter of hours. So that was 1946. In 1966, FRI moved up here to UW-Madison. And so the gentleman you see on the bottom is Mike Foster. His first name is Edwin, but he went by Mike. And Mike was the director for quite a long time here at UW-Madison. And he had three principal investigators. You can see Merlin Bergdahl, Sugiyama, and Dean Cliver that joined from University of Chicago to come up here. Those four folks in particular really established the Food Research Institute at UW-Madison, and really established our excellent reputation in understanding microbial pathogenesis and also toxin formation. I should note, I do miss the old retro profile pictures like Mike has at the bottom there, where the black and white photos and people are staring up contemplatively. I sincerely miss those. I think those are fun and should make a comeback. So that was 1966. And since that time, things have obviously changed. You'll see some of our different directors we've had. I should point out, FRI's only had 5 directors over its 75 years of existence. So that's pretty impressive in my mind. Mike Pariza, the gentleman on the upper right, was the director for quite some time. Chuck Saprinsky was a member of the veterinary medicine school, was our director until earlier this year. And then Chuck Casper, who's a professor in bacteriology and was actually my master's professor, is our current director. And I'll touch on some of these other points on the next slide here. But our mission of the Food Research Institute is to facilitate and coordinate food safety research at UW-Madison that impacts industry. And we work almost exclusively with industry and some consumers across the globe. But to be perfectly honest, our wheelhouse, if you will, our area of expertise is microbial and toxicological safety of foods, and we work with industry. Now, those industries will be around the globe for sure. But that is the heart of what we do. And you can see on the lower right there how we do research, education, and training, and how those all come together. This is a very key slide and a lot of groups to thank, and I can't read through them all, but this gives an example of our collaborations within the Food Research Institute. If you're not terribly familiar with how departments and organizations on college campuses work, join the crowd. It can be somewhat confusing. Back in the old days, when I was a grad student here, the Food Research Institute was its own department. So all of the faculty reported to that department, and that was their home. That department was dissolved late 90s, early 2000s. And so at first, some folks might seem that's a little bit alarming, but in reality, we think it actually allowed us to broaden our expertise in food safety. And so we interact with all of these different departments and entities on campus. You know, Tom's from the Center for Dairy Research. We interact with CVR very, very frequently, Wisconsin Veterinary Diagnostic Lab. So this concept of an institute allows us to engage with many different entities on campus more freely. And ultimately, it helps out our customers, if you will, the folks that we're trying to help out in industry and across the globe. So you can see the different departments and entities that we collaborate with. I'll go through the next slide somewhat quickly, but we study pre-harvest intervention for pathogen control. So that would be things like salmonella and potential contamination in produce, E. coli 015787 contamination in animals before slaughter. We also have expertise in post-harvest interventions, process and formulation controls, and microbial systems. We do challenge studies to see how organisms behave in certain food products. And we have expertise in bacterial, fungal, and parasitic pathogens. This slide I'm not going to read every organism on this, but we have a very, very wonderful group of researchers on campus and our extended collaborators that know a heck of a lot about a heck of a lot of organisms and their control and also their mechanisms of pathogenesis. So we're really, really very fortunate to be here at UW-Madison and have access to all this expertise. And finally, we have an applied food safety lab where we do a bulk of our challenge studies to help validate food safety processes for industry folks. So we actually will inoculate foods from these different processors and developers with foodborne pathogens of interest. We will see if we can eliminate them, keep them from growing toxin. If we can't, we have to tell them in an honest fashion that what they have in mind or what we've been able to do does not work, so that they need to refine those food safety practices. This applied food safety lab is only one of 2 labs within the microbial sciences building and maybe on campus that's capable of working with Clostridium botulinum. So we do a lot of Clostridium botulinum research, which is an incredibly deadly pathogen that makes an incredibly potent toxin. So the impact on this, the work that the Applied Food Safety Lab has on industry and consumers is that we validate processes, we help identify novel strategies, and we work quite a bit with the USDA and the FDA to help establish food safety regulations and guidance documents. For example, some of the work that Jeff Sindelar and Kathy Glass here on campus performed just recently, I think as of 2 days ago, was incorporated into a new United States Department of Ag control document for controlling spore-forming pathogens in meat processing. And that takes years of work, but it has a very, very large impact on many meat processors across the country and across the world. So here are our industry sponsors. This is just a screenshot from our website, the Food Research Institute website. And what I did on the next slide here is I circled the ones that I hope I have correct that have an international presence. Some are based internationally, like Fonterra is over in New Zealand. We have Dairy Industries of Jamaica. So these are the companies that we work with, and they're international partners, if you will. And finally, from an outreach standpoint, Wendy Bedale is our science writer and Lindsay Yan is our outreach specialist. And these two folks help us communicate our recent findings and research, and also other important research findings from other universities around the world to anyone that wants to read and keep up to date with this. And so, you know, I know I'm going on and on about the history of FRI a little bit here, but this is a very important step for these two folks. And I work with them as well. We have a lot of excellent communication through seminars, webinars. We have a newsletter. Wendy writes wonderful scientific literature reviews on food safety topics. We do a lot of outreach across the world to keep people informed of food safety changes and challenges and the research that we do here on campus. And Wendy and Lindsay do a wonderful job with that. So I want to talk a little bit about FRI's impact internationally. And I'll start with basically what prompted me to be invited to give this seminar, which was the work with Jennifer, who provided the introduction today. And I have to thank Jennifer. She did most of the legwork on this project I'm going to talk about. And also our financial specialist, Hua Mua, here at FRI. Jennifer and Hua worked in the background, I'll say, a lot with a group from the Indonesia's Food and Drug Authority. Their acronym is BPOM, so you might hear me refer to them as BPOM throughout the rest of this little part here. But Jennifer and Hua helped organize some food safety webinars and training exercises between our group here, the Food Research Institute, and the Indonesian FDA. And I think it was September and then November, maybe late August and November of this year. And you can see they also visited campus here in September with Dr. Penny Lukito, who's the head of their FDA, to meet with Dean Kate. And that's the picture you'll see here. I just pulled this off of the CALS website to sign a memorandum of understanding. And Dr. Penny, who's the woman in the center there beside Dean Kate, she's a graduate of UW Madison with a PhD. I believe it's in chemical engineering. I hope I have that correctly. So that was nice. And our part at FRI, what we performed was to provide, I guess it was a total of 6 2-hour webinars at nighttime for us to members of the FDA from Indonesia, as well as members of small and medium enterprises, so small and medium manufacturers of different foods, live. And so I'll talk about that in the next couple slides here. Whoops, let me go back. So the first section of these was involving myself, Adam, and they had asked us to help develop a 3 2-hour live webinar series on the food safety systems for dairy products. And the goal of this was to discuss with primarily their small and medium enterprises what folks in the United States are doing from a food safety standpoint for dairy processes. So we talked and addressed, explained common food safety and quality protocols, procedures, and critical safety aspects in the US dairy. And I tried to highlight pretty frequently the more recent regulations published from the US Food and Drug Administration around food safety and preventive controls, which are, for folks who aren't familiar with this, it's a regulation basically describing ways that manufacturers in the United States can protect their consumers from biological, physical, and chemical hazards in their food supply. And I have on the next slide here, I have the Center for Dairy Research emblem on the lower right, and that's because I need to thank Alex O'Brien from CDR for his help with this. Alex was very, very willing to share information in some of their audit checklists and recent food safety findings from dairy processors here that they assist as well. So with this webinar series, it was very enjoyable. It was very formal, I will say that, and a chance to explain to the processors what we do in the United States from a food safety standpoint, and to have those folks in Indonesia compare their food safety practices to what folks in the United States are doing. So we talked about biological hazard control, chemical hazard control, and physical hazard control. And then we talked about what are called prerequisite programs, which again, if you're not familiar with this concept, is basically the building blocks of the starting points of manufacturing foods. Things like having a physical building with no roof leaks, having drains in your facility so that when you wet clean with water, it will go somewhere, it won't just pool on the floors, all the way to very scientifically valid and critical steps called control points, things like pasteurization of milk, fermentation of dairy cultures to achieve a certain pH or acidity level to control toxin-forming microorganisms like Clostridium botulinum, which I had mentioned earlier. We talked about reducing microbiological cross-contamination, reducing allergen cross-contact, and reducing physical hazards. The reason I spend a little bit of time explaining the concepts behind these is just to give folks a flavor for what the Indonesian attendees were learning. These types of courses can often be 8 to 16 hours long, 2 days of in-person trainings. So we tried to hit the highlights for them. Half of the attendees have jobs and were working on site in their company as well. So these have to be concise, important, and informative webinar series that will be impactful for these folks in a timely fashion so they can get along and move along with their day. I gave these from 7 o'clock at night till 10 o'clock at night, which I think was roughly 8 o'clock in the morning for them. There's 3 time zones in Indonesia. So the timing of this had to be thought out in advance for sure. But it was a very good first webinar series, at least from my standpoint. I took this screenshot because I thought this was funny. They really did liven this up as much as you possibly can, liven up food safety and food microbiology on a webinar series at 7 a.m. your time. But they would have trivia questions there. I believe this says, what is the name of our presenter today? This was on day 2. 16 out of 19 got it right. My name again is Adam Borger. I guess if I polled people right now, 16 of 19 might not get it right. So they try very hard to keep this lively and upbeat as much as you possibly can. That was the first webinar. The second webinar followed this series, followed the same pattern, and it involved Kathleen Glass, who's a distinguished scientist here at FRI, has been here for roughly 30 years, and Kristen Schill, who's a new FRI scientist here, who used to work for the FDA down in the Chicago area. And Kristen and Kathleen, or Kathy, I'll say, talked to this same audience about ways to control the microbiological pathogens using thermal lethality, so pasteurization, aspects of maybe non-thermal lethality. So that could actually be like formulation control, low pH over time to have those organisms die off, and formulation control to keep pathogens, something like Listeria monocytogenes, which you may have heard about in the news over the last 20 years, from being able to grow in foods that may accidentally have become contaminated with that pathogen. So Kristen and Kathy performed the same operation, if you will, as I did with the folks from Indonesia. And what one of the I believe one of the challenging aspects of the second webinar series, at least maybe for the people in Indonesia, was that Kristen and Kathy went so far as to have examples of food products and had the group break into smaller groups to discuss these 4 types of products. So low sodium teriyaki sauce, refrigerated custards, shelf-stable cold brew coffee, and ready-to-eat empanadas. These are products that the folks from Indonesia had mentioned are very similar, if not the exact same, to what they're making and questions that they had around them. So I guess it's a jokey slide on the bottom right, but so you get these exercises, these examples of products, their intrinsic and extrinsic factors, so pH, salt, water activity, storage temperatures, and then the groups would work through and determine what types of biological hazards may be present in each of these types of foods, and B, how in the world might you control them from growing and or kill them to keep your consumer safe. So that's where I put, what could possibly go wrong from a food safety standpoint. Those are the questions that the attendees had to ask themselves and then come up with solutions to that. It sort of piggybacks onto the first webinar series that I provided, where we talked about the different hazards and some of the controls. This was a little bit more in-depth analysis on the part of people from Indonesia to really think through those critical factors and ensure safety. And it's a very good exercise for anyone that's in the food processing industry. So that was a very, very successful webinar, I believe, as well. Jennifer had mentioned that we've heard nothing but good comments from the attendees from Indonesia. And again, they were really, really wonderful to work with, extremely formal group. And I thought it was worthwhile, and I'm hoping we can work with them in the future doing similar types of events. I'll end up here on the last maybe 10, 15 minutes talking about some other examples of international activities that researchers from the Food Research Institute have had. And this mostly features photos and not any scientific data, but I think that's fine for today. You can always write to me with questions afterwards as well. This was one article that was just recently featured in Grow magazine here at UW at Madison. And this involves the work with Dr. Jae-Hook Yoo, who you see on the right here, who is a professor in bacteriology and a member of the Food Research Institute. Jae-Hook and a woman named Nancy Keller are 2 world-renowned experts in fungal biology and mycotoxin control. Mycotoxins are the byproducts of the growth of some fungi, particularly molds, that can be extremely toxic and carcinogenic. And so their control, especially overseas in developing countries, and the use of crop production is very important. And both Nancy and Jae-Hook have been studying this and helping with this for years. This was just a recent development from Jae-Hook's lab, where they have developed a compound, they call it detox, that can be used to inactivate mycotoxins in food products. And if I'm interpreting this correctly, it can be used on all sorts of different foods, and it can be applied directly to the food. It's safe for human consumption, and it can degrade, if you will, the mycotoxins that may be present. And that can have a wonderful impact, as it says here in the headline, for humans worldwide. So that's a very recent development, hopefully an excellent product that will be available through research here on campus. We have two affiliate researchers. One is Dirte Dopfer at the top. You can see she's a member of the UW School of Vet Med. And then our more recent faculty member, Joanna Elfenbein from Pathobiological Sciences, who were recently awarded a Global Health Institute grant looking at the issue of antimicrobial resistance in nature. And I looked up a little bit beforehand on the internet about what this could possibly relate to for Joanna and Dirte, just to make it simple for folks who are not used to this concept. And this kind of falls under the quote One Health approach across the globe for many researchers. And so these types of initiatives from Joanna and Dirte can help folks understand antimicrobial resistance and its importance and how that can have a negative impact on human and animal health. This could also hopefully lead to the development of novel therapeutics for clinical options for folks who have become sickened and are worried about antimicrobial resistance and not being able to stem that, say, infection. And then hopefully can be used to discover novel antimicrobial agents and targets. Again, maybe primarily for humans, but also for animals throughout the health production. So that was a really nice thing to see. And again, this is very recent, May of 2021, they were awarded this grant. Another example, not necessarily related to safety with this particular example, but a good example of two FRI faculty who go above and beyond to help with production practices across the globe is Jeff Sindelar in animal sciences and Andy Milkowski, who's an adjunct professor in animal science. Andy and I used to work together at Kraft Foods. Andy's a brilliant scientist who was a research and development fellow at Oscar Mayer Foods back in the day. And Jeff is a wonderful, brilliant extension specialist here and professor on campus. And so Andy and Jeff, a few times now, have traveled to China and held meat processing seminars, not webinars, they were actually in person, training seminars at different meat companies to help them understand the utilization of these raw materials coming from the US and also help them with their meat processing capabilities. That's from a R&D standpoint and a meat processing capacity. However, I know Jeff and Andy have also discussed with these same folks, sometimes here on campus, bringing international people on site to talk about food safety aspects of US meat processing as well. So again, two FRI faculty that have done a wonderful job across the world helping with meat safety and meat processing. I had mentioned at the beginning of this webinar that we have expertise in Clostridium botulinum. I sound a little bit arrogant when I talk about FRI and our expertise in Clostridium botulinum, but it is world renowned. It goes back to the 70s with a gentleman named Ed Shantz, who was a genius in toxin in understanding mechanisms of toxin formation. Ed, honestly, Ed was one of the first to realize that you could use this incredibly toxic substance in incredibly minute amounts as a therapeutic for strabismus, which is where folks have crossed eyes, or muscle tension. It's Botox, essentially. And Ed was one of the researchers back in the 70s that, I think, made that initial discovery with some collaboration as well. And that goes all the way up to, say, a few years ago with another gentleman named Eric Johnson, who helped with investigations in Clostridium botulinum safety. And the one example that I can think of, and I won't name the company, but Eric was instrumental in helping a humongous international dairy with an issue that was thankfully proven not to be a safety issue, but there was some interpretation of testing results and potential toxin formation results between this company and their regulatory body in their country. And Eric, one of our researchers, was able to, I think he went over on site to the country and to the company, help them interpret the data with his expertise, and ultimately talked to the government agencies and was able to prove that the testing that was performed was slightly off, not casting doubt on anyone's testing capabilities, but that this product was shown to be safe. And this is probably, honestly, hundreds of millions of dollars of product impacted, and the company's reputation as well. So having that type of expertise and being able to talk to both companies and government agencies as an independent source of truthful scientific fact is a very nice thing, and we're lucky to have it here at FRI. And then the last example I'll provide here before I wrap up is some work that Barb Ingham in the Food Science Department here has worked on recently. And again, I won't name the company, but we had one of our partners, a multinational, I'll say condiment company, visit and explain how they have been making a product that consumers across the world have enjoyed for centuries, and I'm not exaggerating, hundreds of years. With those new Food and Drug Administration regulations that I mentioned about 20 minutes ago, there are more strict controls on the processor to prove without a doubt that their formulations and their products are safe from biological, chemical, and physical hazards. This company ran into not even an issue, but just a situation where they had to justify with some scientific data that their process that they've had in place, again, for centuries would be safe. So Barbara Ingham really did a wonderful job helping this company out. This took over a year of review and refinement of, it's hard to describe the complexity of this system and all of the different packaging options that this company had. But she was able to help them establish a scientifically valid food safety plan that would prove that their products were safe. And the company was incredibly appreciative. And we were too here at FRI, and Barb is one of our affiliate members. So she's done a really good job helping that company out. And the pictures I have down here are some of the areas that Barb has expertise in. She has expertise in canning, some fermented products that you see here, such as soy sauce and kimchi and cabbage and those types of things. She's an extension specialist that gets involved a lot with the safety of those types of food products. So in summary, and again, I know this was a little bit short, but that was by design. I hope folks today have a flavor for what the Food Research Institute does. And yes, we are primarily involved with industry, but that involvement really does spread worldwide. And I'll be honest, sometimes I tend to forget that. As the outreach person, we're talking to Kraft Foods, we're talking to General Mills. We have friends at those companies that we talk to frequently. You have to keep in mind, and I'll go back to the quote from Mike Foster. When we talk to these companies, this is a large impact across the world, and it goes back to Mike Foster's thoughts back in 1966 to 86, which was the FRI is visualized as an independent, and we are, academically based organization of high technical competence to whom the industry could turn to for unbiased information. And that's the key. We have to keep it scientifically valid and unbiased, because these decisions that we help with these companies make, these decisions stretch worldwide. And I think we're doing a very good job. And we've been doing a good job of that since 1946 in the days of Gail Dack. So with that, yes, that's a jokey slide of a retro profile photo. I think those should come back. But with that, I'll end here. And then Tom, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Hey, Adam, thank you very much. There's a huge amount in there. I didn't know, was that Adam Sandler I was looking at there at the end or not, but
Yeah.
either way, I agree. Maybe we should bring those photographs back. Adam, there's a huge amount in there. And I think in the preamble, before we even got started, I mentioned the fact that food safety is everywhere, right? I mean, it's everybody's responsibility. And it's the one thing that you really miss it when it doesn't work, let's say, or somebody forgets something and someone gets sick. So it's critical for everything. And huge. So thank you very much. I mean, the Food Research Institute is world renowned. You're not being arrogant on that score. Everybody has heard of it. We do have some questions in the chat box. I've got a couple of myself, but I'll go to the chat box first. And Jennifer has a couple. So just briefly, you talked about, some of your the international work you do, but are any of your communications in other languages, or do you do translation, or do you let your partners do that?
We let our partners do that. That might be a failing on our part. We do have folks around the globe that get the newsletter. But as far as I know, we don't have different interpretations of the language. So that would fall on them.
Yeah, no worries.
That's a fair question.
I figured as much. And what about, I might know the answer to this as it relates to the Center for Dairy Research as well, but apart from you get global requests. How does the FRI seek out specific types of international collaboration, or do people come to you?
I would say most of the time people come to us. If we seek out international collaborations, primarily those are with researchers. So one example is on the Clostridium botulinum topic. Kathy Glass and Eric and Kristen have worked with, over the years, a gentleman named Mike Peck, who's in England, who's also a world-renowned expert in Clostridium botulinum. So I think primarily, and I'm not speaking for all the FRI faculty, but in the involvement that I know, if we're collaborating internationally, it's typically with researchers, at least where we reach out to them. If we are asked questions from international companies, then that's one where they're usually seeking our assistance. Fonterra is a good example. Fonterra over in New Zealand, and I'm sure you folks Fonterra as well. We have a very good relationship with Fonterra and hear from them quite frequently. And there are times probably though they may recommend some other folks get in touch with us as well, depending on the issue.
Sure. Another question, probably pertinent for today, but in terms of, has COVID led to any new priorities or different priorities for your global work?
Not for our work. During the pandemic, which is still going on, I will say from our research standpoint, things did not slow down. In fact, Kathy and Kristen would tell you from the Applied Food Safety Lab, it was busier than ever. I don't know why that is. So our research did not slow down. And I know from talking to some of the food manufacturers, some of them actually grew in production during the pandemic because so many folks were consuming products at home. I don't think I'm stepping out of line to say somebody like Johnsonville has told me that their production went up during this time because so many folks were eating at home versus going out to dinner. We've had many different webinars and discussions with members of the food safety community about how the COVID safety protocols within their own establishments may have actually led to improvements in their food safety practices at the plant. And it goes back to when I was talking about prerequisite programs early on in the talk, things like wearing hairnets and gloves and GMPs and washing your hands frequently. That's has been well established in the food processing industry, but with the coronavirus issues and all of the extra precautions that those folks had to take, I think some of them would say that their food safety practices actually probably improved based on those practices to control a respiratory virus.
Yeah, you know, I would echo that as well, Adam. I mean, we saw something similar on our own side. It related exactly what you said. There was a shift, definitely maybe away from food service because all the restaurants and things closed down. But a lot of companies saw increase in business. And even on our side here at the center, we saw more requests for improvements in food quality, safety, less production issues, more troubleshooting kind of questions. So I think that fits in with what you're saying.
Yeah.
So again, if anyone has any questions, we have a few minutes left, I think, yet. But I have a couple here for you, Adam, and apologies if they're maybe a bit complicated, but you know, the work of ensuring food safety is critical across the globe. But here at home, I think we've got a fairly robust process with lots of different organizations and regulations and things to ensure that, you know, our food supply is safe and led by groups such as yourselves. But have you any idea as to how you might look at the effect that your assistance has had when you work with other global partners? Have you ever gotten feedback as to what effect your assistance has had?
We have. It's probably somewhat informal feedback. I think of the example I used with the Clostridium botulinum and the unfortunate maybe misidentification in that product. That was an example where you know, the company, I think, directly reached out to Eric to come over and help them. And after it was over, it was a huge impact, but sort of a low-key approach and resolution, and just kind of a word of mouth. Hey, thanks, folks, for the help. You know, I don't typically for food safety issue resolution, those don't grab headlines. So I think we will just hear from our folks quietly, you know, thank you, or we'll do research studies for them. And they'll take the information and run with it, and you know, they pay us for those as well. So that's part of the thanks. So it's pretty low key. You know, we have had research projects that have had international attention and an impact. And you know, the one I'm thinking of is just recently, Kathy and a young woman named Sarah Engstrom down at Cary. When Sarah was here doing her graduate work, they studied what's called thermization of milk, basically using very low, slow temperatures to achieve pasteurization, and still get what I'm told is like a raw milk cheese product as a result. So you don't call it pasteurized because people don't want to call it pasteurized, but it's a safe practice. And that was just published a couple months ago, I believe.
Yeah, I saw that Kathy spoke at our recent research forum. I was thinking actually, when it comes to implementation of food safety, it's almost the follow-up is almost a case of no news is good news.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Adam, you illustrated, you know, how connected you are with a variety of disciplines and other parts of the university system and industry, et cetera. Could you comment maybe a little bit more about the value of that interdisciplinary cooperation? Any specific examples that might come your way?
Yeah, I'll say this. So when I was in industry, at Kraft and at Rich's, both wonderful companies, but when I went into industry as a food safety and a person and a microbiologist, it's corny, but you hear people say, you know, you're stuck in a silo. But it was sort of true. Everybody's got their job. R&D is trying to make products, push out the door. Marketing's trying to sell this stuff. Food safety and micro folks, we were the wet blanket. We were the ones that always threw water on the wonderful ideas everybody had because we had to prove it was safe. And so to be able to go outside of those groups sometimes in industry was difficult, just on the pace of the work and what you had to do and the amount of manufacturing facilities you had to look over. Being at UW, everybody's busy, I get that, but it's a different environment in that I have found people do want to collaborate. Not saying in industry they didn't, but they might not have as much time or as much availability and interest, depending on the topic. But here, I have been very pleased. I've been here almost 9 years. I've been very pleased with how willing other departments are to help with issues that we run into. So, like a good example is another company that I won't name, but they had an issue with potential concerns of foot and mouth disease virus in like something like a milk powder. And I think a lot of their product was hung up at a dock somewhere. And their inspectors wanted to show that they had lethality of a virus, which isn't really a food safety issue, and establish their thermal processing to control that virus. I don't know anything about that, or most of our researchers probably don't, but a guy named Mark Edsel in food engineering does know a lot about that. And just talking to Mark, very willing to help, extremely busy. It took a little while to get him pinned down, but very willing to help with his expertise in that, and basically showed the product was safe and saved these folks millions of dollars. But again, scientifically valid rationale with engineering, understanding the heat tolerance of a virus and the company's food processing practices that fall outside of some of our expertise. But that collaboration with someone who really isn't involved with our institute but still willing to help was really refreshing. We see that pretty often.
I'd agree. I'm with the center now for about 3 years, and I found that as well. I mean, everybody's exceedingly cooperative. And even as you were going through your presentation, I was taking some notes. I need to follow up with you afterwards. My last question for you, Adam, it's a little bit blue sky, but you spoke about the origins of the FRI, how it's developed over the years, and some of the new kind of things you're looking at, new products, new antimicrobials, et cetera, fungal contamination, all that good stuff. What does the future look like? What do you see on the horizon for FRI, or any thoughts in that area?
Yeah, I think and I've talked about this before on some different seminars. What we're seeing at the campus level, I believe, is that from a microbiological standpoint in food systems, I'll say, the safety aspects are certainly still very important. Joanna Elfenbein is a new faculty member studying salmonella shedding in cattle in part. Jerry Barak studies salmonella in plants. But I'm noticing as more faculty are hired, there tends to be maybe a different focus on like microbiome initiatives in human health and food safety as well. And it's a little bit too difficult to detail in a question and answer period, but researchers like JP Van Pijkeren in food sci, Federico Ray and Garrett Suin here in bacteriology, those folks are looking at human and food safety health through maybe a little bit different perspective, and how the microbiome of foods and humans impact safety. So from a research standpoint, I could see that maybe gaining some steam across many different universities. However, for FRI, while those folks work with us, that applied food safety lab that Kristen and Kathy run, and Kristen's going to take over when Kathy retires at the end of next year, that we still get questions that need to be addressed that we've been looking at since the 70s. Low moisture foods and the survival of salmonella during roasting processes of nuts, things that a guy named Bob Dybel published on back in the 70s. We still get those questions, and as these companies and their technologies change, we can help them validate that. From a technology development standpoint, Tom, that would be one where, again, we might lean on folks outside of FRI, food processing, food engineering, biomedical engineering. Those folks will probably be the ones coming up with the concepts and the engineering principles. We can then help validate and discuss the products they're making and the safety impacts that they might have.
Excellent. It strikes me again, Adam, that this is a really good example of, let's say, the Wisconsin idea gone global. You know, it's I like that analogy too. I don't see any other questions for now. So with that, Adam, thanks a million again for a really excellent presentation. Much appreciated. I learned a few new things. I hope everyone else did. And with that, thanks, Adam. I'll throw it back to Jennifer.
I echo the thanks to both of you, Adam, Tom, our co-sponsors, all of you that are listening and attending. Thank you. This actually concludes our first year of Global Conversations. We've had a fantastic year with amazing speakers and conversations, really focused around several priority theme areas. For our second year, we're going to be making a few changes and organizing the conversations around geographical regions. And so I just wanted to put a plug in to encourage everybody to check back at our Global Conversations website over the next month or so to see the lineup for the spring semester. So with that, thanks all, and carry on.
Thanks,
Bye,
Jennifer.
guys.
Thanks,
Take
Adam.
care.
Yep.
Bye-bye.